Alrighty, this video has a number of bits and pieces. I explained the situation with Greece's bailouts a bit better, and get some exact figures on commodity exchange manipulation and mucking around with the gold. And another strange thing that's been happening this year in commodities derivative markets. I may have covered some of this before, but not quite explained it well, but I explained it very clearly in this video. And a few other bits and pieces, including shenanigans happening with a particular bank that we have here that is having quite a bit of trouble and needs to raise $3 billion. Also, there's a bit of breaking news in regards to gold. Texas has started what they call they've signed this into law. Governor Abbott signed it into law. It's called Texas Bullion Depository. And basically, like Utah started accepting gold as legal tender and for taxes a few years back, Texas has decided to do the same, and they've got an actual little place where you can go and deposit your silver and gold if you're a member of the state of Texas, and I believe just an American in general, and also Texas state agencies can deposit any gold or silver holdings there. It's basically setting up more or less a gold and silver bank for the purposes of, you know, any currency devaluation, currency collapse. They will just step right over and start using gold and silver through this Texas Bullion Depository. That's the idea, I believe. Also, China has done something. It has devalued its currency. And as a result, it's deliberately done it in order to encourage, well, foreign countries to buy more Chinese shit to help them get rolling again after their recent stock market collapse, or, you know, dramatic stock market shake-up. And so to help the economy along, they've deliberately devalued their currency quite a bit. They have had the biggest one-day fall in their currency value intentionally since 1994. They've devalued it that much that it dropped so much in that one announcement. It hasn't dropped that much in one day since 1994. And this is just a thing they're deliberately doing to try and get the economy wound up. But if you think they're manipulating the economy, what do you think quantitative easing was all about? Same thing, and the Chinese can play the same game if they need to, but they don't sort of pour more money into private banks, which is what quantitative easing was doing, to try and inject more money into the system to get the system going. They've deliberately devalued their currency and henceforth the exchange rate to encourage people to buy more Chinese shit, while the rest of the world has not got a great deal of money to buy any shit with anyway. But anyway, on with the rest of the video. Alrighty. Well, there have been a few different things going on in the financial markets of late. I've got a bit more clearer information on a few different things. So I will explain a bit of that. I got the exact number on the COMEX ratio with gold. It has traditionally, or not so long ago actually, only been 20 to 25-ish, somewhere around there, to 1 for the amount that they're actually got comparative to the amount that they can give you. So, you know, there's 20, maybe 25 ounces sold for every ounce of gold they've had in the vault. quite recently that's jumped to 124 to 1, relatively quickly over the last few months. As for something else that's been going on, and people are very, very suspicious of it, commodities derivatives. I don't know if I mentioned this in a film, in a previous video or not. Generally speaking, the commodities derivatives market is worth around about $200 billion. Like, as in, they've got $200 billion worth of commodities derivatives contracts. And as of even last year, that was the case. And JP Morgan held $131 billion worth of those. In other words, they had like, 55% of the market. In the first quarter of this year, things have gone absolutely bonkers. Unprecedented for no real reason, no real change at all. The market for that has jumped from around about $200 billion worth to $4 trillion just so far this year. I'm pretty certain that's only the first quarter of this year. And for a long time it's only ever been $200 billion. All of a sudden it's 3.8 to 4 trillion, somewhere around that. Basically it's jumped 20-fold from the start of this year to like the end of the first quarter. Which the end of March, I don't know what the hell is going on. Nobody does, but there's a very strong suspicion that this is some attempt by the Federal Reserve to save the US dollar, to, maybe do something to make the debt not be such a big issue or something, the government debt or something like that. There is something very sneaky going on, and it is believed that it's the Federal Reserve is in cahoots with JP Morgan in some way, and this is basically an attempt to save itself from a crash. Now, there has been a bit of talk even on the mainstream news here, when a few weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, the Federal Reserve Bank of Australia, which we call the RBA, it's just known as Reserve Bank of Australia, basically went and told all the banks to make sure they got enough cash in their reserves to avoid another GFC. See, they're smelling it coming. Our own Reserve Bank is smelling another GFC coming, and they've warned our banks, we want you to have more cash in reserves so you survive what may be coming. And you think, friggin' hell. To avoid another GFC, And in all of that, things went really apeshit for one bank, known as ANZ. It's Australia New Zealand Bank, and they obviously have branches in New Zealand and branches here. They're got like a blue sky colour, a bit darker than sky colour, sort of a logo. And they basically needed to get another $3 billion more liquidity. They were going out, how did they put it, like fundraising or some shit like that. In other words, they're running around trying to look for another $3 billion that somebody could put in, or anybody can put anything in to make it amount to $3 billion. In all of that, things sort of, when all that was announced, they actually froze the trading of it for about 3 hours and then reopened it, and then it dropped a bit one day, and then the next day, or was it 2 days later, it dropped massively, absolutely massively, and the shares of this ANZ bank are worth less than they were during the GFC, less than they were during the bad days of the GFC. And there's real panic stations on about that bank. They lost quite a bit. Just overnight, in one day, they lost more than 10%, I think it was, or around 10%. But anyway, they're worth less than what they were during the worst days of the GFC. So we'll see how that bank will probably survive, I assume. They're one of what we call the Big Four, which is the four major banks in this country. I don't know if that includes the one I'm with, which is Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, who has little subsidiaries, one of whom has the loan for this place, and another, well, their main bank is who I do my daily banking through. But anyway, yeah, fun times. It's not a joke about the shortage of silver either. They reckon during the days of the GFC, it wasn't that there was a shortage of gold and silver, it was only industrial grade stuff. It was, silver shot, more for industrial use, and 1,000-ounce bars, they're available. 1 kilo or larger bars and gold, they're available, but it was stuff that was affordable to the average Joe on the street, and sort of not industrial grade gear, but sort of more privately owned bullion, personally owned bullion grade stuff. That was what they had a lot of trouble getting during the GFC. But apparently now things are just drying up in general, and a lot of mints are just having trouble getting hold of anything, whether it's 1,000-ounce bars, whether it's shot, or anything that they can melt into, bullion that I can buy as 10-ounce stack of bars or 1-ounce bars or 1-ounce coins or whatever sort of thing. Yeah, so that's all intriguing. See how that all plays out. When I said about the Shemeter, I didn't necessarily say I believed in the Shemeter, full stop. I was trying to explain to you guys what the theory is that's going around in the conspiracy circles. But I'm not saying that I would completely pass it off as bullshit either. And we will see, and we only have a month and a day to find out. When these last days of Shemeter have come, it has never been that there's a tradition to release everyone of debts that day, Jewish tradition, and as you know, there's a lot of the big banks have got a lot of Jewish influence. It's been like that that's not a racist thing, that's the way it's been ever since. There's a passage in the Bible that they used to be harking on about not making people pay interest on loans, and that there's usury, and that law still sort of exists under Islam, believe it or not, but Christianity had it, and then we sort of just let it slide. But when it was an issue back in the 1500s and shit like that, there were one crowd who wasn't Christian, who did seem to have a few of these people in every city, and as a result of not being Christian, they couldn't be charged under the usury laws that applied to Christians, and they were the Jews, and that's how the Jews got into banking early on in Europe. And of course, Rothschild, they are a Jewish descendant family. There's another theory going around I should drop on you. I believe it's bullshit, so I don't believe this one will actually occur. It may, but I really doubt it. But there completely is the option for it to come about. And that is that if everything turns to shit, China and Russia will back their currency with gold, and all fiat currencies, including the US dollar, the euro, the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, although the Australian dollar and Canadian dollar are more or less thought as commodity currencies, because generally that's why there is international trade done with our money and the Canadian money, is because people want to buy our commodities. But basically all fiat currencies will hit the deck if Russia and China are to back their currency with gold. And don't worry, China has the gold to do it, and Russia is pretty well stoked in gold as well. I don't know if they could cover all their stuff, but at the end of the Soviet Union, when that collapsed, they actually had more gold than they needed to have to cover every ruble in existence, to buy up every ruble or back every ruble with gold. They actually could have backed every ruble with gold and then still had gold left over. And, well, the Western economists and Western bankers and all that said, no, you want to go fiat currency. And they almost did go gold standard in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, because most politicians understood the concept of backing the currency with gold, and it seemed like a pretty fair and reasonable idea, and vast majority of them, more than 80% of them, I think, supported that idea. And then they got bullshitted into going fiat currency with the IMF, and then henceforth they had the ruble crisis of 94? I think it was either 93 or 94. I'm pretty sure it's 94. They had that was when the ruble started collapsing dramatically in value. It just, people who saved every day, well, every paycheck, they put away money, and they'd been saving money for 25, 30 years and saved up the equivalent of bucket loads, tens of thousands. Within 6 months, that stuff was only worth a couple $100. And of course, there was a rush on to try and get it transferred into something else if you possibly could, but due to a lot of entanglements and bullshit, it was sort of not happening for most people. So the vast majority of average Joes lost their 30 years worth of savings. One other thing I was meant to mention about Shemitah is Shemitah is not, the last day of Shemitah hasn't traditionally been the end. It's been, the last day of Shemitah has been when the major cracks have first appeared in the financial markets. And that was the first, it's like the beginning of the end has been the last two end of Shemitah days. So we'll see how all that goes. Oh yes, I almost forgot. Spain has banned buying any sort of silver or gold bullion of any kind. You can't buy silver eagles, you can't buy gold maple leafs, you can't buy shit there. They've banned it. To stop people trying to get out of the flaming euro as a currency, or find another way around trading without all these. They don't want them to have an alternative in case it affects the day-to-day trade, and henceforth sort of creates a domino effect, and may have a result on taxes, may have a result on bailouts and bonds and everything else. You know, if there's a big rush out of the euro, there could be trouble. So that's what Spain's done. Now, Greece has banned buying gold coins. I'm not sure about silver. If you can't buy gold coins, I doubt you'll be able to buy gold bars. But I don't know what silver may still be fine, but I know just all I've heard is gold coins in Greece have been banned. I want to tell you another little thing about Greece too, and I believe this is most likely happening with most of these bailout countries. These bailouts, say for instance, we'll take the example of the most recent figure that they want to be bailed out, well, not the people but the government, and it's $86 billion. Now you think, well, that's going to put $86 billion into their economy, that's going to, you know, like into their government coffers, and no, actually no. You may not have thought of this, but see, the government doesn't take out loans traditionally. What they do is they basically sell bonds. Now, in the case of the United States, they actually get Wall Street banks to put the bonds on the market, generally speaking. But what basically happens is they don't go down to JP Morgan in Greece or anything like that and say, we want to borrow money, we're the government, you know. They put out bonds, and the bonds that they sell are a way of basically making a loan via the bonds market directly to the public to invest with them, not through some smart-ass bank manager who's skimming off a whole heap for the bank in interest payments. So then it becomes basically people investing money that they are essentially loaning to the government. That's what bonds are. If you've got a bloody big company, you know, like Microsoft or Ford or GM or some big-ass joint like that, I'm sure Apple could do it as well, you can actually make corporate bonds as well. And with the first bailout Greece received, so they had to pay their debts. And all this bailout money, in fact, not all of it, but 93% of the bailout money went purely to paying all the interest owed to the bondholders. And any who reached the end of their bond, if they get a 10-year bond or 20-year bond, whatever, when you get to the end of that bond, not only do you get your last year's interest, but you get all your money back as well that you invested initially. 93% of that money in the first Greek bailout just went to all the bondholders. That stopped them from defaulting. See, they don't default by not paying a loan to the bank. They default by not paying their bondholders. And pretty much most bailouts from then on have been about 80% of the bailout has gone to paying out their bondholders. So with these bailouts, there are private people, and more often than not, superannuation funds and hedge funds and shit like that, and investment funds, making money in the form of interest from bonds. When they can no longer pay those bonds, that's when they default. The reality is they should have just told these people, look, the game's over, Remember the other day where they had what they call a downgraded to junk status, which means the market doesn't think that the Greece government will be able to pay its bonds and pay, the money, the interest on its bonds. And as a result, it's all panic stations, and there's a talk of a bailout, and then they upgrade them again because they think they will be able to pay their bonds. The reality is they're not going to be able to do this. At some point, they've got to burn your private investors like your grandma, like your flaming financial institutions. They've just got to let them burn because they've got to default because they can't afford to, stay on. And that, unfortunately, may impact other countries, the pigs as they call them, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, obviously, Spain and Italy. And, that may affect their bonds in turn, or may sort of shake the value of the euro a little bit, and they're all concerned about that because they're all in it together. As the whole, euro is all hooked in together. If one goes down, there's, it sort of has a bit of a carry-on effect with the rest of them. But yeah, that sort of explains a few bits and pieces. But, the reality is it's so fucked, it's so far beyond it that even the people on the street knew it, and that's why they voted not to have any more bailouts. And yet the bloody government turned around and done it anyway. And I'm sure there were plenty of banks who held Greek government bonds who wanted it all to continue, but they are going to drive the country absolutely into the dirt the way it is. Add to that another, 20,000 migrants a year or something like this coming over from Syria and stuff like this, and the same's happening in Italy. They're all pouring over, and I think it's 90,000 this year alone or something like that so far in total has been coming out of Africa and Syria trying to get to the EU, and here you are with old Greece absolutely on its hands and knees, and yet you got people trying to, migrate there, boat people turning up there. Now these Europeans get the feeling that of what we've had for a long time, people turn up in boats, half flipping starved and sick and shit and whatever. But yeah, I really believe they're just going to drive Greece completely into the fucking dirt. They're just, when something doesn't work, you don't keep pushing really hard trying to make it work. Like if it doesn't work the first time, you might try a second time or a third time. But if it's still not working, you don't just go, we're going to push harder, and just try harder and harder and harder, doing the same thing that didn't work the last bloody 3 times in a row or 4 times in a row. It's stupidity, and they're going to drive the friggin' country into the ground. And there has even been mentioned on the mainstream news here that, people are wondering where these bailouts are going to end, where it's ever going to end, and there's been hints that some people believe it's going to end in civil war in Greece. And we will see, but the bastards shouldn't have gone in for another bailout after the referendum with the people, and the people said, no, we don't want it, and they shouldn't have bloody gone ahead with extra bailouts. And I don't know what they're trying to do, but it looks like they're trying to drive Greece right into the friggin' dirt, just about crash the bloody place into the ground, all over a bunch of bondholders, Too late, game over. It's time to burn them and friggin' rebuild the country, but they really do need, they can't sort of fix up a few bits. They retire at age 53. There are heaps and heaps of government offices which are basically financial black holes. You pour money in and it just seems to go nowhere. There's a lot of cronyism. There is also 8-fold the amount of government workers per capita. Like as in, say if Germany has, 5 government workers per capita, or 3 government workers per capita, Germany's got a certain amount, France has got a similar amount, a lot of other EU countries have got a certain amount. Greece has 8-fold the amount of government employees per capita than other Euro countries do. they can't patch anything up. They need to actually just clear the slate clean and start again, because the system is so full of shit over there. They're going to throw it all out and start from scratch and rewrite a new retirement age and everything, because 53, I mean, bloody hell, you know, they can't afford it. Over here, the retirement age is 67. So, and we got money, but maybe we've got money because we're not retiring everyone at age 53. But anyway, that's the way it all is.